Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Welcome to Weird Web Radio. I'm your host, Lonnie Scott. And in this episode, we feature an interview with the most incredible Morgan Daimler. If you're familiar with any fairy lore or fairy witchcraft, or just involved in any kind of Celtic reconstruction, you've probably heard of Morgan. In fact, she lets her topics cross the lines, even into the paranormal world, and she has one foot in the Celtic lands and another in the heathen and the Norse. So she's got a really unique view into modern witchcraft practices and even into the path that she's created and practiced on her own. Morgan is a pretty dynamic author as well. The official word from one of the sites, Moon Books, says that Morgan's been a witch and a polytheist since the early 90s, following the path inspired by the Irish fairy faith, blended with her own neo-pagan witchcraft. She teaches classes on Irish myth and magical practices, fairies, and related subjects all around the United States. And from this interview, it sounds like even in Ireland. Even outside of that, Morgan's been a pretty prolific author. She's written several books, including for Pagan Portals, on the Morgan, fairy witchcraft, other subjects. She's written books on the fairies and the fairy craft itself. And she's even got a book coming out soon on Odin. Now, I've gone on and on about her at this point for quite a while, and I just want you to know that Morgan has been an amazing guest. We had a lot of audio problems and a couple tries to get this to go. Could have been otherworldly influences, could have just been the storms outside. We don't know. But we finally got it in. Forgive some of the pops and things that go on in the audio. I cleaned it up the best I could. Sometimes nature just wants to get involved in ways that we don't anticipate. So kick back and relax. Grab your favorite drink, a bucket of popcorn. Take it easy out there and enjoy this show. Thanks for being here, and stay weird, my friends. Welcome to Weird Web Radio.
Yay!
For everyone out there, this has been quite a trying procedure. I believe we have forces in the other world working against us for some strange reason, but we persist.
We try to persist.
Right. Now, you are a very active writer and practitioner within the realm of fairy witchcraft, fairy lore, and most people will know what we're going to be talking about by the word entitled fairies. But is there some other way you would like to refer to them?
I tend to refer to them out of habit by euphemisms. It's the more traditional approach. It's thought that, ironically, given all of our technical problems tonight, it's thought that when you use the F word to describe them, sometimes that can annoy them, or if you get their attention using that word, that they can be angry. They don't like that word, according to some people. So a lot of people, particularly in the traditional cultures that still acknowledge them, they tend to go with euphemisms, which in English would be things like good people, the other crowd, the gentry, the fair folk, mother's blessing, things like that.
Okay, I've seen them.
Just a good way to, if you do get their attention, you're saying something kind of nice. So then they figure if you think well of them, they're not going to be annoyed with you. Hopefully.
Yeah, we can always hope. So I've seen you refer to them as the good neighbors, the good people. Different things like that, which is why I wanted to ask. So we will try to shelf the F word, as you put it, for the duration of the show. My apologies to them if it slips from my mouth. Please allow the recording to continue.
It's a lot of people are more familiar, with that term. So even when I teach classes, I'll use that word just because that's what most people understand and recognize. We did have a running joke the last time I was in Ireland, though, doing a tour, that we weren't supposed to say the F word.
You'll need a safe word in English and Gaelic. So What is one thing that you believe to be true about them beyond any skepticism or doubt?
That they exist, I think is probably the big one.
Yeah. Well, hey, fair enough. What makes you so sure of that, though? What is it that allows you to discern in your mind between imagination and their tangible existence?
Oh, that's such a simple question. That's actually so much more complicated than it sounds.
Exactly.
That's right. Go right for the hard-hitting questions. I mean, me personally, I have what is sometimes referred to as the second sight, or the spirit sight. So I've always seen them from as far back as I can remember. So to me, they're just sort of a part of ordinary reality. I realize most people don't see them, so it's a little different for everyone else. But to me, they're just part of the world, even though they're not what most people understand them to be. They're not like nature spirits. They're not part of this world the way that other spirits might be, but they're definitely here and present here. And I also think, beyond my own personal experiences on that end, there's just so much folklore, and there's so many stories and so many personal experiences, even up through today. A lot of people, when we discuss this, we tend to talk about the older anecdotal stories and the older evidence. But even in modern times, a lot of people still have experiences and still have encounters. There was a recent book that had come out by I believe it's called the Fairy Investigation Society. It's titled something like Seeing Faeries. Simon Young was one of the people who helped put it together. And it's just a collection of modern day fairy encounters. And there's another book that just came out, Magical Folk, which is along the same lines, not entirely anecdotes, but similar. And, if you go up on YouTube, which is always a misadventure waiting to happen, but if you go up on YouTube, you can find videos of people, sharing modern encounters and modern stories. So this very much isn't something that's just relegated to the past and to 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It is still something that happens and that people still encounter and deal with today. It just probably isn't what a lot of people imagine it to be.
Oh, absolutely. But, I think another perspective to look into here, you say we don't always have to look to the past. There's plenty of modern encounters and experiences, but how culturally bound are you whenever you go to interact with them? Are there specific rules in place no matter where you encounter? Are they sort of, do you think all is a dangerous word here. I guess I'm overgeneralizing, but has certain sets of principles that you can go forward with, whether you're in Massachusetts or Ireland?
I mean, my personal approach is to always err on the side of caution. When you look at the different cultures, and as far as I'm aware, every culture on Earth has some type of being which is equivalent to, or cognate to, very similar to what we would sort of lump into the category of Western European fairies. I tend to just call all of them fairies, but I use that word. See, I said not to use the F word, and here I am using it, but I use that term as like a catch-all sort of term, as opposed to a specific. I think when we look at those beings within any specific culture, there's always rules for how to interact with them. There's always different behavior that's expected or appreciated. I think some cultural types are more lenient and some are less so. And I haven't obviously studied every single culture and the types of beings, the otherworldly beings that they have. There's just too many of them to be an expert in all of them. But to compare, like, say, the Irish to the Norse, the Norse tend to be a little more lenient when you look at the folklore, with when you have encounters between the Huldufolk or the Alfar, and human beings. They tend to not be quite as harsh in their interactions, and if expectations aren't met, or if people, screw up, to put it mildly, you still don't want to do that. There's still repercussions, but they're a little more lenient with it. Whereas the Irish, they definitely do not grade on a curve, and they're much more serious with their reactions to things. So I tend to approach everything as if I'm dealing with the Irish ones, just because they are the most rigid, I guess I would say, of any of the ones I'm familiar with. Most of the ones in the New World, in America, I shouldn't say the New World because obviously it's not new. It's been here for as long as any other part of the world has. But most of the ones in New England, where I live, the different tribal otherworldly beings tend to also fall into that, like, slightly more lenient range from the ones that I've studied in my area and the ones that I'm familiar with growing up. So, it's always better to be more polite than you need to be, as opposed to less polite, I guess, is sort of how I approach it.
Makes perfect sense. Erring on the side of ethics, kindness, especially when dealing with otherworldly forces, is probably the best idea. I've got friends that go around telling people, please stop yelling at ghosts.
Yeah. Well, particularly because you can't be 100% sure it actually is a ghost.
Oh, yeah. And we'll get into that, but we're not there yet. Stay tuned. You said something in there when I asked about discerning the difference between imagination and whether you're really engaging with them. Mm-hmm. And you said that you have a second sight. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does that manifest itself to you? How do you recognize it as second sight?
That's a good question. Well, the second sight is a little complicated because it's more than just seeing things. There's some other aspects to it, but I can see spirits. I can see ghosts. And when I see them, it looks like a person, but they're not entirely here. It's as if they're sort of midway between here and somewhere else. To use a modern analogy, it's not actually that modern. Actually, I'm going to date myself to the mid 20th century here, but it's like old fashioned film exposure. If you have something that's like halfway exposed on a negative, you can definitely see that it's there, and I can see the details of it, but it's clearly not completely physically present here. When we're talking about the other crowd, sometimes I do have a difficult time being certain they're not human people, because some of them can look very human, or being sure they're not actually animals. Usually I have to get a clue on behavior, things that they do. I have a story that I've told before, not obviously on your program, because this is the first time I've gotten to be your guest, which is very exciting, but told before in other places and in some of my writing, where when I used to be an EMT and I was working on an ambulance one morning, and it was very early. I used to work the 3 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. It was probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning in winter, so it was very dark. And my partner and I had parked because we were waiting before we had to be somewhere. We had parked in a little lot next to a construction area, and they had a very large field, probably the size of maybe 2 football fields, that had been fenced off because they hadn't broken ground yet, but they were getting ready to. And my partner was reading. I decided to get up and walk around because I was bored. And I was standing outside next to the fence, and I noticed this white dog coming across the empty lot towards me. And like I said, it's like 2 football field sized lot. So it's a good amount of space. So I could see that it was a dog. I could see that it was white. It looked like something kind of like a greyhound, but bigger and a little bit bulkier. And it was coming straight towards me. I didn't think too much of it. I figured someone was out in the morning and was letting their dog run in this lot. I couldn't see any people, but it was a large space. And as it was getting closer to me, about halfway across the field, I realized the way it was running was strange. The actual movement wasn't right. There was something not correct with the motion. And when it was about 3/4 of the way across from me, so it was maybe 200 yards away, I realized that it only had one front leg, and that the front leg was sort of in the middle of its chest. And a lot of fairy animals, and fairies in general, can have some what we would consider deformities. Obviously, they don't, because that's just how they are. But this was clearly not an animal who had like an amputation. It had been born the way it was, and it didn't slow it down. It was moving pretty quickly. And that was sort of the moment that I realized it wasn't a mortal, a human, not a human dog, because that makes no sense. But you know what I mean, like an earthly animal. And fairy hounds in general are not usually good things to see. Usually in the folklore, they're like omens of death and other, super fun things like that. It actually scared me when I realized what it was, and I turned and ran back into the ambulance and jumped in, scared my partner, who of course wanted to know what my problem was. So I started saying, there's a dog. And he looks out and he's like, well, what dog? There is no dog. And I look back out and it was gone. And it had taken me, no more than maybe 4 or 5 seconds to run and jump into the ambulance. And it was a completely fenced in area. There was nowhere for this animal to have like hidden or disappeared to. It couldn't have gotten out of the field from the direction it had been running in. It had literally just disappeared. So, things like that, talking about how do I see them. Sometimes I see them where they seem like they're very physically there, which I realize is probably going to make some of the people hearing this think that I'm crazy, but I'm not hallucinating, I promise.
Well, that's okay. They wouldn't be listening to this show if they didn't already think such things were possible.
I try to take comfort in that saying, like, if you think you might be crazy, you're probably not crazy. So I do try to reassess my sanity on a regular basis.
Yeah, fair enough. It's probably not a bad policy to have once in a while.
Yeah, well, life can be very strange, so it's a good idea to just take stock every now and then and be like, okay, let's just make sure we know what's going on here.
Yep. When in your life did the second sight make itself present?
As far as I know, I've always had it. As far back as I can remember, my earliest memories are probably when I was a toddler, because I can remember being in preschool and a few things before that. I just always saw these things. I was really lucky because my family was not a religious family. I like to say I was raised a secular agnostic.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, that's the best way to describe it. I mean, we celebrated, Christmas was when Santa and his reindeer came, and Easter was when the magic Easter bunny came with chocolate. There were really no religious overtones to holidays, but there wasn't disbelief either. There was never any real emphasis on these things don't exist. So I used to tell my family that I would see these things and that I believe in fairies. I used to build fairy houses when I was very small. When I was a little bit older, I would ask my mother to write letters to the other crowd, to some of the beings that I was seeing, and I would leave them on my windowsill. And this was probably when I was like 6 or 7, I want to say, maybe 5. I don't remember for sure. I couldn't write yet. So I had been younger than 8 at that point. So this has just always been an aspect of my life, one way or another.
Okay.
Never went away.
Yeah. Well, what got you started on your pagan path? If you were raised a secular agnostic, sounds like you had to find it somewhere.
Yes, I totally blame my best friend in middle school and then high school, who ironically was a devout Roman Catholic. Some shenanigans were involved here. Legitimate shenanigans. My best friend growing up, she was from Ireland, and her family was Roman Catholic. But when I was about 11 or 12, she's a year younger than I am, she had gotten a copy of Cunningham's Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, which is like everyone's gateway drug to Wicca. And she had read it, and then she had been kind of curious, so she wanted me to read it. And when I read it, for me, it was like that giant cartoon light bulb moment, because I had always read a lot of mythology. I'd always obviously believed in spirits and otherworldly beings and things along those lines, but I had no framework for any of it. I had no concept that like you could have a religion based around these things. And I really, was a very irreligious child. So that was sort of the point when I had that moment of like, wow, you can actually practice witchcraft and you can be pagan, and these are legitimate things that are options for people. And I started devouring. I mean, this was like 89 going into 1990. So it's not like there was a ton of stuff on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly when you're like 11, you have kind of limited access to resources.
Right.
Yes, seriously. It was an interesting time. But I started devouring what I could get. So, there was Cunningham. I got Buckland's Big Blue Book, Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book, which was like it's like the baby witchcraft starter pack right there.
Witchcraft starter pack. Nice.
Yeah. The 1990s version, I'm sure, these days,
right.
There's completely different things out there. I got Sybil Leek's Diary of a Witch. All of these sort of classic texts that I'm sure people these days haven't even heard of. This was a while ago now. But that really just opened my eyes to the fact that this was all possible. And then within a few years from that, I really got very super focused on the Irish, and Irish polytheism, and got into what I would later find out was more Celtic Reconstructionism. At the time, I didn't know that existed, but that was sort of where I had kind of shifted my focus to around the mid-90s.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a similar story that a lot of people have. I grew up in the same era. I think I had a copy of Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book of Wicca. How much I really used it.
I think it was required.
I was lucky. I think I'm lucky. About the time I was 17, so this would have been in 94, I believe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody handed me all in the same motion. Like, I don't want these things. Here's a copy of Edward Thorson's Futhark. Here's a copy of Pete Carroll's Liber Null and Psychonaut. And those two books changed my life and still echo through it today. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's funny how much impact a book can have.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how it works out that way. You had a pretty interesting route into where you found yourself now. What?
Yeah. Interesting is a good way to put it.
So what 2 or 3 values would you say are at the core of your craft?
Oh, that's a tough one. Trying to think of how to encompass it in just like 2 or 3. I definitely think, I'm not sure like what the exact correct word for this is, because I'm an author, so clearly, choosing correct words is very difficult for me. Um,
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
big challenge.
Go ahead. Just write. Don't worry. There are no editors here.
I think I would kind of encompass it in the concept of like adventure, risk taking. I think that's sort of an underrated virtue, if you will.
Sure.
I think in spirituality we have to be willing to take risks and to try new things and to put ourselves out there a little bit. Particularly, of course, because my spirituality at this point focuses a lot on the Hulda folk and the Thina Maha, the Faeries, elves, whatever you want to call them, in both the Irish and the Norse Germanic contexts. And to do that, like, you have to be willing to try things, to see what happens. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it really, really doesn't. But I would say that definitely is a core value, being willing to take risks, which is probably not an answer you'll hear from a lot of other people in a religious, spiritual context, but here you go.
That's true.
And, I think another one would be honesty. And that just comes from having dealt with these sorts of spirits for such a long time. Honesty is a really big aspect of things. It's an important value in general, I think, in life, but particularly in spirituality. The idea that you have to be true to your word, and you have to speak the truth, is something, again, I think maybe is a little underrated, but it's very, very important. And I'm sure I can think of a third one because I love things being in threes. Let's see. So risk-taking, honesty, because those two go so well together. And for a third, probably compassion. I do think that that's a key aspect to all spirituality if you look sort of across the board. Even the spiritualities that like to have a tougher facade.
Yeah. I agree. Even we had this discussion recently in the Troth amongst our members' email list, if compassion belongs in heathenry. And I always kind of thought that, compassion shows itself in a lot of ways. Hospitality and kindness, gift giving, reciprocity. These are relationship building, all encompass compassion in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And that's sort of why I chose compassion as opposed to any one of those individual things. I think that compassion underlies a lot of things. You really can't have community without some concept of compassion underneath it. There's always going to be a point where someone can't necessarily immediately repay you for something, or where you're going to need help and you can't immediately repay the other person for it. I think we get caught in this idea that reciprocity is an instant sort of thing. That we give and we get back immediately, or we offer to the gods and the gods bless us immediately, and it's not always that. It's not always that instantaneous. Sometimes there's a bigger time scale involved between the giving and the getting, and I think compassion helps us keep that in mind.
Yeah, you recently started a discussion on Facebook, I saw, that concerned the nature of the gods. What are they? What people think they are? And you came down to a point where reciprocity was a big part of your discussion, and saying that, it's less of this clear, how did you say that? It's not always a good guy on the other end, nor does it always have to be,
Yeah. I think I was talking about the Surturhaller, Surt's cave in Iceland.
Yes.
I'm not a huge fan of Surt, by the way. Just so all clear. I like the world a lot, and I prefer it not to be flamey.
Yes, I like Midgard alive and green and blue and beautiful.
Yes, I much prefer it. That's where all my stuff is, and
Yes.
very invested in it staying the way it
Nice.
is. But I had been watching a TV show actually. I admit I have a horrible weakness for Josh Gates and any show that he does, and he has this show called Destination Truth, and he has another one called Expedition Unknown. And Expedition Unknown, they were doing one where they would go into Iceland. I can't even remember the actual point of the episode because it's highly entertaining. But they went to Surt's Cave, and they were talking about with some people from the university that was in the area about all the offerings that had been left in the cave and why they thought the offerings were there. And I know there's some other theories as to what the bones are in the cave, but it really got me thinking about the fact that, these people who were offering there, they weren't offering because they thought that this being was their friend or because they wanted to have this positive connection the way we normally think of when we offer to gods. Like we want this reciprocity where we sort of imagine they're in our Inengarth, if you will, they're on our side in some sense. It was more of a, please don't cause this volcano to erupt and burn our houses down. It was a different angle on why you would offer to a powerful being. And yeah, it definitely got me thinking about the entire concept of how we view supernatural powers, for lack of a better term, gods and not gods, as the Irish would say, and why we make offerings, and what the real purpose is behind some of that. And when I get thoughtful, I like to, force other people on Facebook to think along with me.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah, you have, as far as I could tell, at least 2 blogs, and you use Facebook like an interactive blog. So, yeah, but that discussion was really cool because it does bring up a bigger point. And I think that, especially if you're going to be working with more otherworldly beings, give more thought to what it is you're dealing with here. Yeah. It's not just, I gave you a present, now give me a present. And it makes sense the way you put it. In ADF ritual, there's always a part where you made all the offerings and then you expect some sort of blessing in return. But for the proto grove that I work with, I'm usually the one that takes the omens. So I read the runes. I pull a rune for each one of the kindreds represented in the ritual. And instead of, I sort of say, we've given now to you, the ancestors, the mighty dead. What is it that you bring to us in turn? And I draw a rune, and I don't interpret the rune like, okay, they just gave us a present. I like to sit with it for a second and really kind of let my intuition guide me based on the rune poems that are associated with it, my own experience with the rune and what it means to me, and interpret it more as a lesson, something that's advice. You've got access, or here's what we need you to do now in return, more than it is a concrete, like the gods didn't just say, thanks for the ale and the flowers and the things you threw in the fire. Now I'm going to give you 2 more years. Or I'm going to make your arm grow again, or whatever it happens to be, It's more, now the communication is opened up between us, and it always involves, I think, a blessing from an otherworldly being always involves work. Blessing come with a task.
I agree. Yeah, and I think that's brilliant insight right there. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't necessarily conceptualize. Even if we look more at the historical approaches and the folklore, when you're asking the gods or the powers or whoever you're asking to help you have a good harvest, it's not like you expect to wake up and have everything in baskets at your doorstep.
Right.
you still have to do the work. You still have to harvest it and bring it in and store it and process it. And the better your harvest is, the more work that's going to mean for you. You're just asking them on their end to make it as abundant as they can or as they're willing to. But it definitely isn't a get out of work free card.
That does bring to mind, though, I think pagans today are really good at avoiding some of these questions. Let's use a harvest as an example. Let's say you've held all your rites and ceremonies properly in order with offerings just as expected in your tradition, and the crop is shit anyway. Through a more pagan lens, how do you interpret that?
Well, there's a variety of different ways to approach that. I think for myself, the first thing I would do is probably divination, because I'm definitely one of those divination people.
Well, that makes two of us.
When in doubt, divination. So I think, my first response would be, divination. I would definitely look at whether at some point along the way something had been done improperly, whether something hadn't been given to the degree it needed to be given to, or at the proper time, or the proper amounts. Particularly when you're looking at something like the harvest cycle, like they used to be very precise in how they offered and when they offered and what. And I think we're very out of touch with that. I'm so trying to avoid becoming that person on the porch shaking their cane at all the kids, telling them to get off my lawn. But I do think to gently criticize some of the modern community. I do think that there's some danger in looking at everything and all the holidays and all the actions through too symbolic of a lens. When we reduce everything that's done entirely to symbols, I think we're losing a lot of the way that it probably was approached in the past, where, you weren't necessarily just doing something symbolically to encourage the land to be more fertile or to encourage better harvest. There was a real belief that your actions, through sympathetic magic or however you want to view it, had tangible and real results. It wasn't just going through the motions in order to say, we danced the maypole, which is a horrible example, but we danced the maypole and it was really fun and everyone had a great time. You were doing that because that was a literal representation, or I should say a figurative, to pretend that I actually, do have a grasp of the English language here, a figurative representation of the fertility magic that you were trying to put out there into the earth. And I have noticed some people who tend to approach the holidays more as, I'm just going through the motions of this symbolic representation. And to me, that's really losing touch with what the holiday actually was and what it's supposed to be. If you're going to celebrate it today, at least be aware of, if you're going to do the folk traditions, what they're actually supposed to be and what you're actually doing. Because it's not just, for fun. I'm sucking all the fun out of the holidays as I speak here.
Yeah.
There used to be a belief in Ireland up through within the last 100 years. Moira McNeill talks about this in her book, Festival of the Nasa, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend it. That even into the 1920s and 1930s, there was a strong belief that the other crowd were entitled to a tithe, a 10%, there we go, of the harvest. So, they weren't talking about that symbolically. It wasn't like you harvested from your garden and then you would take like one pepper or, one head of lettuce and be like, this is my symbolic tithe to the good people. They literally meant it as an actual, like, they're entitled, these otherworldly beings are entitled to a portion of this harvest. And I also think that we need to be a little cautious with things like that. If you're going to make offerings, as a friend of mine likes to say, offer until it hurts, or don't do it. Because just doing it as a symbolic, going through the motions, that can get you into trouble, is my ultimate point here. Especially if you're trying to reconnect to that older symbolism, because it wasn't always just symbolism. It used to have some teeth to it.
Sure. I don't think many, especially in the ancient days, I don't think many of the people would have participated if they didn't expect something to really happen. I think many people get into witchcraft and magic and the occult now for the same reasons. You're not going to get into it if you don't really hope and expect that something's really going to happen, that it has real teeth.
I would so like to agree with you on that. I hope so. I think more with the witchcraft practices that probably is still true. The celebrating the holidays, I've noticed that people do tend to, everyone wants to have something to do when they celebrate, and I don't think people always really connect or understand. I'm about to bash the Victorians here, so just brace yourself, because I have a passionate dislike of the Victorians. But I think people kind of harken back, consciously or unconsciously, to that Victorian approach, and they looked at celebrating the holidays and adding these pagan elements to their holidays as sort of a fun way to dress things up and to make it more entertaining and to make it more fun. Except for divination around Halloween, because the Victorians were very into that in a very serious way. You had to know who you were marrying. That was important details. But, a lot of the other stuff, they really, for them, it was just a fun game. And I think that we, in general, as a community, just need to be really careful that we're not sort of falling into that. And I think all of us have seen, every time a holiday comes around, whatever faith you celebrate, whatever type of paganism, every time a holiday comes around, there will be this glut of articles and posts about, like 10 fun ways you can celebrate whatever holiday, or, 5 things you can do on your own to celebrate this holiday. And it just concerns me a little bit when I see stuff like that people are sort of missing the deeper meanings to what a lot of those things meant.
How would you prepare a group? Say you had 5 people coming to celebrate Samhain with you. How would you prepare them to be in the proper mindset and attitude that you're talking about?
Oh, people coming to celebrate Samhain with me, I would be like, hold on to your butts, because it was about to get weird.
I'll see you in October then.
Yeah, be like, Samhain's such a good example. I actually celebrate Samhain over 3 days, because I have a day for the gods, and I have a day for the dead, and I have a day for the other crowd. So yeah, Samhain with me is a trippy time. But no, I would probably just tell them, like, if we're doing something to honor the ancestors, you need to take this really seriously. We're not, one of the things that I haven't done in a while now, because of my children, but that I used to do, is I would go and clean up a graveyard. My part of New England, you literally can't swing a stick without hitting. We have these tiny little, like, pocket graveyards, and some of them go back to 300 years, and they're not well cared for. They're not like big public cemeteries. So I would find one, and they're usually, overgrown and full of leaves and things like that, and I would just clean it. You rake up the leaves and you kind of tidy, take care of overgrowth. A lot of times the stones have fallen over, and I don't mess with those because I don't want to break them. They can be very fragile, but clean up as much as you can, and then leave offerings. But it has to be done with respect. It's not just a game. It's not like you're just showing up and leaving whatever food offering you're leaving, just so you can be like, well, I did it, check it off the list. You have to take it really seriously. Now I sound like a total buzzkill again, but there you go. And things like if you're going out on Samhain night, and the other crowd are involved, like you need to be aware that's not always the safest thing to do. And things can happen and they can be, sort of uncanny, hopefully not dangerous. Like I try never to put people in dangerous situations, but you have to kind of be prepared for strange things to happen, and try to be aware of your own safety. So yeah, celebrating Samhain is kind of a whole different animal. But celebrating Imbolc, for example, because we just had that one, you see a lot of people talking about, having the Brigog, the little Bridget doll, and making a bed and all that. But those sorts of traditions, it's not just when we can cast a circle and we'll have this doll and we'll put her in her bed, that literally in the traditional practice, at least the majority of them that I'm aware of, the doll is seen as sort of an avatar, or a physical representation of the goddess, or the saint if you're Catholic. And you would invite her into your home, and once she's invited in, even though it's a doll that's believed to have that goddess or some aspect or piece of that goddess within it. And you kind of have to approach it with that in mind, as opposed to just like, oh, isn't this, super fun? And they took that like very, very seriously. Like they would do almost the next morning. And if there were indications that the goddess hadn't actually visited the home or hadn't been in the home when she'd been invited in, they would make sacrifices. They actually, in Scotland, there's records of practices where people would sacrifice a chicken at a crossroads. They would assume if Bridget didn't show up at your house, it was because she was angry with you, and you had done something wrong. Speaking of, if your harvest comes out bad, even after you've done all the stuff you're supposed to do. So they'd go to a crossroads and they would burn incense and they would sacrifice a chicken, with the idea that you're trying to appease her, so that she won't be angry with you anymore. So, this sort of stuff was taken very, very seriously. It wasn't just oh, this is a really cute little folk custom. Let's participate in it because we're pagan and that's what we're supposed to do. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we promised earlier that we would get back to a subject you brought up a little prematurely.
I have a habit of doing that.
It is that time. If things are going bump in somebody's house at night, they start to think maybe that their house is haunted. How would you say they could discern between a possibility of a human spirit, not everyone has a second sight, and the other crowd being involved? What sort of things might we find in our homes?
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Oh, there's lots of things in anybody's home at any given time. I think just really quickly before I get to actually answering the question, I think that's another thing that people do need to be aware of. Like, we have a very human-centric view of everything. The reality is we're just one part of this much bigger sort of spirit ecosystem that's out there. So any home, apartment buildings, even hotels, in my experience, you're going to have land spirits that are sort of attached around the area. You're going to have house spirits. You're going to have sometimes otherworldly spirits that also exist or, make a home in that area, in that house. And you do often have human ghosts. The majority of the time, people never have issues with these things. Most people aren't even aware they're there, usually unless you make them angry, which isn't that hard to do. The biggest things that I recommend for, trying to figure out what you're dealing with, which sometimes can be very confusing. Just to be fair, like this isn't always a really simple, straightforward thing. In my experience, human ghosts, will affect temperature. So they're the ones where you'll notice you have cold spots, for example. I will say that the gods also do this, but much more extreme and usually only during like invocations and things. So most of these things that I'm about to say, like, you don't want to look for just one, you're going to want to look for multiple. Because you can sometimes have other things that'll do the same particular thing. But temperature drops are usually human ghosts. Messing with electronics in the sense that you see on like the paranormal ghost hunting shows, EVPs, ghosts when they talk don't generally speak where humans can hear them. Average, that didn't sound right. No offense to anybody listening. Most people can't hear a ghost if it's talking. Whereas the other crowd, you will hear them with your ears. You will just hear them speaking. That's one difference you'll note. Turning TVs and radios on and off, in my personal experience, is more of a ghost thing. Draining batteries is more of a ghost thing. I have had issues with the other crowd messing with computers, as you may have noticed. This was not the first time that has happened. I've had that happen on other podcast type things that I was doing. When that subject came up, suddenly things get very feedbacky, and it's not even a real word, but you know what I mean. We start having weird interference and things like that. So they certainly can affect electrical things. It's just much more common for ghosts to do it. Ghosts will move things, but the fair folk will take things. If an item actually disappears, if you had a pen or a ring on a desk, and it moves 6 inches, or it falls on the floor, or even like with force gets thrown, that could be a ghost. If on the other hand, it just disappears, it's gone. You search everywhere, you can't find it. That is almost always going to be the other crowd doing that. And they'll take things like car keys, jewelry, anything anything important to you that you really need to find. Underwear could definitely fall into that category.
Yeah. Underwear gnomes.
And then profit. Sorry, that's my favorite episodes. When the fair folk take things, they almost always return it, but it'll show up at a weird time. Sometimes you'll have given up, it'll be months later, and it'll usually turn up somewhere super obvious that it could not possibly have been that whole time. I actually had a bracelet disappear. I moved to a completely different house, and a couple weeks after I'd moved, I walked into my bathroom in my new house, and the bracelet that had disappeared was on the floor, in the middle of the bathroom floor. So things like that. Like that's fairies. Ghosts don't do that, in my experience. They'll just move things to some degree, but they don't actually take them. I will say, and this is just my personal experience, I have seen and experienced ghosts tripping people, pushing people, pulling hair. I myself have never seen or experienced a ghost scratching anybody, but I have seen fairies do that. And in fairness, fairies will also push you. They're not opposed to physical violence, so
Sure.
There's that. That's if you get pushed, it could be either one. But I know that a lot of the paranormal shows on TV will show people getting scratched and then make a big point that it's ghosts. I can't swear that ghosts never do that, but in my own personal experience, I've never seen that. But I have seen that with other types of spirits, not ghosts. Oh, my one final thing would be animals. Generally speaking, fairies don't seem to really freak animals out the way that ghosts can. When you have your dog barking and you can't see anything, when you have your cat run out of a room, that's usually a human ghost. Cats, in fairness, can sometimes get a little weird around fairies. They'll chase them and do other things. But let's face it, cats are just weird. So you really shouldn't base anything on cat behavior, I don't think. Fairies do like to sometimes bother animals. They'll put mats in their fur. It's called elf locks, that. And they'll do other things to sort of harass them. But I've never seen animals just react in weird or bad ways to fairies being present. Whereas with ghosts, animals can get kind of twitchy.
That all makes perfect sense in my experience. I love how you took a moment to point out, too, that we are just one thing in the vast landscape of spiritual forces, entities, other worlds. There's this... I'm really enjoying seeing this drive to educate people on animism and a more animistic worldview that I see going throughout paganism today. It's almost as if paganism decided to grow up.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see even people who don't totally get animism, because I'm starting to understand a little better that for people who are coming from a very materialist, non-ensouled perspective, that maybe it's difficult to totally break out of that. But even people who are making that effort and getting sort of halfway there and be able to see, things like trees or plants or, larger things like streams and rivers as having spirits, that is such a big step in the right direction, I think, for all of us.
Right. Absolutely. If the more we can all start to see our world more alive as it is, I think that we just have a better chance of
definitely
surviving.
Definitely. We have to get over that disconnect.
Yeah.
That our culture in general is coming from, that tries to tell us we're not actually part of this world, and that we're sort of the top of all the pyramids, whether it's the food pyramid, or the apex predator pyramid, or whatever else humans like to believe that they're on top of. I think the more we can start to see it as a more organic web of connections, the better off we all are.
Absolutely. Well, Morgan, we have come to the end of our normal broadcast. We're going to get into the bonus questions for the Patreon subscribers in a moment. But before we do, is there anything I didn't cover that you'd kind of like to go over? Any parting thoughts?
I think that was pretty thorough. I hope it wasn't too boring with my ranting about, everything should have no fun in it, because I don't think that's true at all. I think you should have a lot of fun in everything that you do. Just, take it seriously while you're having fun with it, I guess is my parting message.
Hey, makes perfect sense to me. And believe me, I didn't cover everything I want to. I'm going to bring you back for another episode, whether you like it or not.
Out the technology,
yeah, we just have to juggle computers.
Horrible feedback, scared into submission.
That's right. Yes. So, where can people find you? Your work, your blogs?
I try to be everywhere. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Generally on social media, I just go by my name, Morgan Daimler. Daimler is a fabulous German last name that I blame my husband for. Daimler. So generally, if you type Morgan Daimler in, I'll pop up. All my books are on Amazon, which, Amazon's the evil empire, but unfortunately, often the easiest way to get anything.
When in Rome.
Yeah, exactly. Barnes and Noble carries them too, but Amazon's just so easy for most people, especially for like ebooks. I do have, I have a book on Odin, Pagan Portals Odin, coming out March 20th. So that's exciting.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have it pre-ordered.
I am excited for that one. We didn't get into this in the regular recording because I got sidetracked with tangents, which is, the story of my life. But I got into heathenry in 2006, and I do consider myself dual trad, the awful, evil dual trad person.
Oh no!
Yeah, I know, it's terrible, between Irish polytheism and heathenry. My main focus is on the other crowd, the Alfar, by any other name, as it were, within either Germanic culture or Irish culture. But yeah, I've been a practicing heathen. I've been practicing to be a heathen, we'll put it that way, since 2006. Yeah, that sums that up.
Well, good. What are your websites?
Let's see. I have my blog, which is called Living Liminally. The actual address for it is at larvonblogspot.com, which had I thought about that,
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's Irish, so it's not spelled at all. It just sounded. But I also do blog for Pathos, which I like doing. That's more my fun blog. My Living Liminally, I can get very academic and citations and all sorts of stuff going on there. And I do have a Patreon as well. Most of my patron-only content that goes up there relates to my translations. I translate from Old and Middle Irish into English because that's my fun and exciting hobby. Everyone needs a fun and exciting hobby. And let me see, I do have a website. It's also my name. It's a YOLA site. It's like YOLA site Morgan Daimler. I just try to keep everything under Morgan Daimler because that way it's much easier for people to find things.
That's right. So go to Google, type in Morgan Daimler, and I promise you will have months of reading material. And not just any reading material, fantastic, absolutely wonderful reading material. I promise anyone who takes the time to get into Morgan's work is going to learn things they did not know when they got there. Beneficial things.
Thank you for saying.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing all the hard work that you do.
Yeah, I try to keep busy.
All right, folks. You have gotten your chance to hear everything from Morgan. If you'd like to hear the bonus questions, we're going to cover them. And all you have to do is go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio. Again, it's only $5 a month. That's less than a common latte. Stay weird out there, my friends. Okay, gang, that's a wrap on this episode of Weird Web Radio. Once again, thank you all for listening. Now, it's time for you to go join the official Weird Web Radio membership. Go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and you can choose your rewards and become a member today. Enjoy all the exclusive benefits, inside information, and plenty of bonus audio with each guest. Now, you can find the show at weirdwebradio.com and weirdwebradio.libsyn.com. The show is listed on Facebook and Twitter as Weird Web Radio, and you can find me on Instagram as just Lonnie_Scott. please remember to rate and comment and share the shows that you like, and it helps others find us in all the search results. Shoot me an email if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you know someone that would be a great guest in upcoming episodes. You can send that to weirdwebradio@gmail.com. Seek the mysteries and delights in life, my friends. As always, stay weird out there.